It reads like a story out of a John le Carre novel. Spies, a killer, secret messages. Those are just some of the components that brought hostages home who were being held by Vladimir Putin in Russian jails. Per reports, the turning point came in late June when a group of CIA officers sat with their Russian counterparts in an unnamed Middle Eastern capital to hammer out final details for a swap. The deal on the table: 24 prisoners sitting in jails in Russia, the US, and scattered across Europe would be up for grabs. That got both sides to yes. In the end, that secured the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, former Marine Paul Whelan, and 14 other Americans, Russians, and Europeans. One of the Russians freed from a German jail had been convicted of killing a Chechen separatist and had been hailed by Putin as a, quote, patriot. Under the night sky in Washington, the hostages got off the plane and ended their own chapter of their horror story in Russia. Paul Whelan had this to say.
It didn't feel real until we were flying over England. I'm a British citizen, Irish citizen, Canadian, and American. So as we came over England and I looked down, that's when it became real. We flew over Ireland, then Canada, into America, and then I knew I was home. So getting off the plane, seeing the president, the vice president, that was nice. It was a good homecoming. So looking forward to seeing my family down here and just recuperating from 5 years, 7 months, and 5 days of just absolute nonsense by the Russian government.
Meanwhile, the intricate negotiations led to a huge victory for Biden and his administration. Taking a dig at his former opponent, Donald Trump, this is what Biden had to say.
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now?
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Now that the dust is settling, there are some people who are critical about how the deal was struck and believe that it could actually spur Russia to take more hostages. With us now to unpack all of this is Peter Doran, an adjunct senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Set the scene for us a little bit. Obviously, it's great news that these hostages came home. There is a little bit of a discrepancy here in the swap, though, in terms of who was returned in exchange for these hostages. How much of a concern is it that this could incentivize future hostage taking?
Well, thanks for having me. Let's talk about the good news first.
Absolutely.
All Americans were delighted to see our people come home and return to American soil. And I think our hearts go out to all of the families who, for the first time in many years, are now reunited with their loved ones. These were individuals who were illegally held by the Russian government and held out as bait for a negotiation. And I think that's the difficult problem here, because we have violated the iron law of American hostage negotiation in this deal, and that is don't pay for hostages. The risk here is that we incentivize more hostages being taken in the future so that more families have to go through this pain, and that's what we should avoid.
But Peter, just a light pushback here. If that were the case, then why didn't Trump do anything to try to get these hostages back, especially since he has this quote unquote, relationship with Putin? Could it perhaps have something to do with, in the instance of the the person who was being held, in Germany? Is that because they had to deal with the German chancellor and Trump's relationship with allies around the world was much weaker and he wasn't willing to create those kinds of circumstances to have a multidimensional hostage release?
I think that's a great question. And when you go back and look at the German government's response to the Biden administration's initial request to release a convicted murderer who had assassinated someone in broad daylight in front of witnesses in the middle of Berlin. This was an individual who was a refugee in Germany, and their killer was in prison under a life sentence. Mm-hmm. And so the German government thought it was morally perilous to release someone back into Putin's custody after he had violated the sanctity of German laws. So when we look at the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, we can see that the Trump administration was reluctant to pay for hostages, whether through swaps or direct payments. Contrast that with this current big deal. Yes, it's historic, but it certainly comes at a high cost.
Right. And this is not the first time, of course, that we've had a situation like this during the Biden administration. Brittany Griner, the American basketball player, was swapped for Victor Bout, who was a Russian arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death. So clearly they are not afraid to continue to take Americans at this point. When we're looking at the mindset of Vladimir Putin in terms of these trades, it seems like he is not even willing to negotiate unless he feels like he's going to get some kind of lopsided victory. Right. So what is the right approach here, if not to incentivize the hostage taking, but also while recognizing that Putin might not even come to the table unless he feels like he's going to get something better than what the U.S. is getting back?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Remember, Vladimir Putin has a very specific negotiating philosophy. It is zero sum, and that philosophy is I win, you lose. If I succeed, you must get the worst part of this deal. The reason Putin agreed to this swap, this exchange, is because he believed that he got a better deal than what he was giving up, than what the Americans were giving. So we have to be very cautious here. And remember, Vladimir Putin perceives an element of weakness in this swap, and he has pounced. Also remember, he tried to return that Merchant of Death you mentioned, Victor Bout, under the Trump administration, and Trump said no to the deal. Yes, it's terrible that an innocent individual, in this case Paul Whelan or Brittany Griner, had to remain in illegal custody in Russia. But again, you cannot pay for hostages. Otherwise, you create an incentive for more families to suffer this pain. And that's why Aaron Gershkovich was taken hostage. 4 months after swapping for Victor Bout, Vladimir Putin gave back Brittany Griner, and yet then he took another hostage. So this cycle will continue until we close this bazaar for hostage negotiation and trading.
It seems like this is somewhat a PR stunt for him, and even with Donald Trump, his unwillingness to negotiate was a strongman play, and they're two strongmen playing off of each other. But behind the scenes, there must be something much more complex. I mean, without speculating, obviously we were not in the room between the negotiations, but is there a chance that whatever intelligence these spies that we've released and criminals that we've released back to Russia, would they have information that just may already be in the hands of Russia? Like, there's nothing that we're losing here in terms of incredible intelligence that could put us at risk as a country.
Yeah, that's correct. Remember, back during the Cold War, we did swap spy for spy. That's a typical pattern that has been established. That's different than swapping innocent individuals, innocent American citizens, for spies and convicted murderers. Also remember, this is a political coup for Vladimir Putin. He is a former Russian spy himself, and his message back home in Russia is, look at me, I'm the leader, I return our spies from abroad. So this is a major victory for Putin, and again, it comes at a high cost for the United States.
Is there also a possibility of this having some kind of impact, or at least a signal as to where Putin stands in regards to the Ukraine war? We've seen that Zelensky has sort of walked back his assertion that anything less than restoring pre-war borders would be a major loss to Ukraine. Putin perhaps is interested in coming back to the negotiating table. Is this maybe a sign of good faith to some extent that those talks might become more real?
A lot of people in the last 24 hours have been grasping for a bigger story here in the hopes that this could be the beginning of a thaw in, say, U.S.-Russian relations, or the beginning of a détente, an easing of tensions between Moscow and Washington. Unfortunately, the facts don't bear that out. In fact, there is barely any relationship at all, and Putin is running circles around us at this point. I don't see this as an opening. If anything, I see this as one additional story and a very long trail of tears related to the taking of American hostages abroad.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how the negotiations came about? We know that Germany was involved, but there's been extensive reporting on just how complicated this was. This wasn't, as you said, there's barely a relationship, if any relationship, between Putin and the Biden administration at this point. So who does have that relationship? How do they have those conversations?
Well, we actually benefit from the Wall Street Journal's own dedicated reporting on this topic. And I would point out the original deal was designed to free Alexei Navalny. Remember, he was the leading Russian political opposition figure. He went back to Russia in an act of bravery, you could say. He was promptly taken prisoner, and he died in February in a Siberian jail. That destroyed a lot of the planning and preparation for this deal that has been in the works for many months, if not more, over a year. The original deal was essentially to swap Putin's assassin in Germany for the freeing of Alexei Navalny. Once he died, everything got scattered and both sides had to renegotiate the terms of this arrangement. So again, the death of Navalny was tragic for sure, and it is very sad that he was not also returned. He didn't survive Putin's prison, but the others, including additional Russian dissidents, they have been freed. That's good, but the cost is tremendous, especially since Navalny was not included in this swap.
Certainly. Well, Peter Doran, thank you so much for joining us on Rising this morning. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you very much.